Welcome to the follow-up question. I am your host, Michael Ashford. Here on the follow-up question, I'm exploring what it means to find common ground with others, especially others with whom we disagree. And that's really rampant these days, is it not? There are so many different perspectives and experiences out there that my goal with this show is to bring those to you. I know there are a ton of other interview shows, but only this show is going to help you learn what it means to listen more, to ask better questions, to become an observer of a situation rather than always having to feel the pressure of being an active participant. I'm a former journalist. I believe everyone has a story to tell, and I want to bring you these real-life stories of people with amazing perspectives, experiences, desires, dreams, and thoughts so that we can all become who we truly were meant to be, which is better connected humans. So I got a question for you. What do you think of when I say the word manipulation? It's usually not a positive thing, right? We think of, the used car salesman who says, "Let me speak to my manager," when you ask for a certain deal on a car and they slip off into the back room to give the appearance that they're on your side. They're working to give you a deal. Well, what if I called it social engineering instead? And what if the difference between the two is how it was used? That is exactly what my guest this week and I discuss here on the follow-up question. This week, I talk with Christopher Hadnagy. He wrote the book Human Hacking: Win Friends, Influence People, and Leave Them Better Off Having Met You. And we talk about the difference between being manipulated and the construct of social engineering, working through human emotions and empathy and rapport building to get what you want out of many, many situations. And you will hear Chris tell some incredible stories about how he was able to get what he wants, including for us parents, how to deal with, obstinate children, perhaps. So many amazing insights and takeaways in this conversation. I am excited for you to hear it. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the podcast today, where I give you just a few quick wrap-up thoughts. And then don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter, The Follow-Up, which drops every Friday, where I go in depth on that particular issue from the week's conversation. You don't want to miss those Friday newsletter drops. That link is in the show notes as well. And let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Chris Hadnagy. The difference between social engineering and manipulation. What is it, and why is it important to make that distinction?
Yeah, that's a great question to start off with. So I know if you look up social engineering on the internet, you'll find 100 different definitions. And some of them are the manipulation of someone to do this, or this. But about 10 years ago, I redefined social engineering because I saw positivity in it as any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in their best interests. So the difference comes from that definition, where when we look at manipulation, it often has a negative connotation to it. That when I manipulate, if you say someone's manipulative, it usually means they're bad. Like, oh man, they did something wrong. Whereas if you say someone's influential, that usually means something positive. So I look at social engineering as being both could be positive and negative. So it could be influential and it could be manipulative. Whereas manipulation is always that negative side of getting someone to do something.
You also talk about empathy, and that being, I believe you called it a value neutral word, when I think so many of us tend to assign a positive attribute to that. Why also the distinction of empathy being value neutral? How can we? Well, I'll stop asking questions. Why the assigning of a value neutral term to empathy?
Yeah. So first of all, I think empathy is very, very important. I want to use the right word. The challenge that we have today is we live in a world that already was digitized. It was already so closed off pre-COVID, where it was not uncommon to see people walking on their phones. How many of us did this? You walk into a convenient mart and you think someone's talking to you, but they're on a headset. You know, I've witnessed this myself. I've fallen for this. It's not just a commercial. I said hello to people who I thought were talking to me. They look at me like I'm a freak because we live in this closed bubble. Now you add a global pandemic. and we have to do everything like you and I are doing it right now, where I get to see from your shoulders up, and that's it. And you're a two-dimensional figure with your shoulders up. That mixed with the depression and anxiety that's coming from isolation has made it so empathy is hard for people. It's really hard to feel what other people feel. So I don't want people to think when they think of empathy as just saying, I understand what you're going through, Michael. Maybe I don't. Maybe you and I both lost close family members to COVID. Does that mean I understand you? No, because what was your relationship with them? How many years did you see them? What did they do for you in your life? How old are you? What is your family makeup? There's just so many what ifs that can make empathy so hard for me, for you. So what I say, the reason that it has to be neutral when you approach it is it's direly important that we have empathy to succeed at being a positive social engineer. But getting it is not always easy for everybody, and harder now.
Chris, the topic of social engineering and bringing empathy, more empathy into our interactions to, as you said, may or may not persuade somebody to do something they may or may not want to do. Why is that important to you? What led you down the path where empathy and social engineering for a bigger cause is so important to you?
So when I get paid to break into buildings, right? Yeah. So a company hires me and I get to go and I get to break into a building, and that's a really fun job. But we always try to use pretexts or acts that are not going to really hurt the person, but there's always an element of trickery. And over doing this a decade plus, I got really good at it. And it started to get easy to use this in everyday life. But that's not a great plan, because you start to trick people that you want to have a relationship with. Right? I want to be able to someday meet you in person and not have to be embarrassed by something I did to you. Right? So I want to be able to be like, next time I meet Michael, we're going to be buddies because he had a great interaction with me. So I started to think, well, these skills have a value, but when applied outside of the pen testing arena, the adversarial simulation arena, outside of that, when we apply them in everyday life, that if you don't use empathy, it's too easy to become a manipulator. So I started to see people coming, I started seeing people coming to my class. They were coming from sales, psychology, teachers, trainers, dance instructors. They were coming to the class trying to say, I want to learn these skills for life. And it made me really sit up and go, I have to teach this a little differently. I can't have you going out and making believe that you're from the same area that you're from just to build rapport. Because if you want to, let's say you want to date that person, well, that's negative. What if now all of a sudden you're in a relationship and you find out that he lied to you, that she lied to you, she's not really from that area? Well, how's that going to work for a dating relationship? So empathy became a core mantra of what I was doing, and moving this to the masses outside of my industry to say, look, you can use these skills that hackers use, but if you don't do it with the moral responsibility of empathy, you're going to turn into a manipulator. And will you succeed? Yes, but your relationships will be short-term and really harsh.
You mentioned rapport there, and I want to ask you maybe kind of a big question here, Chris. Are we losing the ability to build rapport or even think about building rapport before we jump into a conversation?
Boy, that is a big question. One thing that I've been noticing, especially if we look at the end of last year with the political situation in this country, in America, that affected the world. Okay, so if we just look at that, people lost the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. Right? So maybe you and I have different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, different moral beliefs. But then why do I have to hate you because of that? Why do I need to look at you and go, no, you're not a human, you're disgusting, you're dirty, you're this, because we don't believe the same thing? But the internet and the anonymity on the internet has made it so I feel empowered to call you all sorts of horrible things that I would never say to your face, because I can say these things about you and not have to look at you in the eye. And that ruined our ability to build rapport, because building rapport is not about me, right? So our good friend, Robin, introduced us.
Yeah.
And I've known Robin for 15, 16 years. And Robin, his first book was entitled, It's Not All About Me, How to Build Rapport with Anyone Fast, right? And the whole basis of that book was, when you're going to go in a conversation with someone, don't think about what I want out of it. What is it that you want out of this conversation? And if I come into a conversation with that, then we're going to react really well if we both are thinking that way. Think about that from your dating or marriage partner. If you went into a disagreement, like, what can I do to make her happy? I'm not going to argue with my wife. We're going to have a conversation, maybe a debate, but we're going to leave amicable and happy. And people lost that ability. So I agree with what you said, is that we seem to have lost this concept of, I need to enter this conversation with rapport in mind. So that way I can leave you feeling better for having met me and not leave you feeling worse for having met me.
What are some things that we can think about then in going into a conversation where we might disagree? We might strongly disagree these days. What are the things that we can keep in mind, the listeners who are hearing you right now can keep in mind to, I guess I'll use the phrase, level set before a conversation?
I love that phrase. So if we look at, I want to pick a scenario, but I want to pick one that's not too volatile. So let's just pick one that's like gun control, right? That there's people who are really, all guns should be taken and away from everyone in this country. And there's people who are like, nope, I should be able to own any automatic weapon, no matter how big and powerful. And those two groups often hate each other, not just disagree. So if I know I have to go into a building that is heavily armed and I disagree with that, what I need to do is find common ground. Now, what the problem is the way most people approach common ground is by trying to convince you to come over to my side. So let's just say we're opposed in this belief. You hate guns, I love guns. So I'm going to try to convince you why guns are great and why you need to have guns, and why if we had guns in schools, then nobody would get shot again because teachers would be able to take the bad guy out. That's not common ground. See, it's not common ground. It's finding the thing that you and I can agree on, and not making believe I agree with you, and not faking that I'm on your side, because that's not common ground. So what's the agreeable point? Nobody wants children shot in school. Nobody. Well, there's our common ground. So let's stop talking about me convincing you, you convincing me. And I can even say it if the thing starts getting heated. You know, Michael, and I agree, we definitely differ in this, but I guarantee one thing we are the same on is neither of us want our children getting shot in school. And now think about what happens to your emotional content. How do you get angry after that? How do you maintain anger? Because now it's like, oh yeah, you just brought me down. You just brought me down and not down in a humiliating way, but in a humble way. And common ground is the one thing that can fix our problems when it comes to this heated debate. And if you can't find a common ground, then excuse yourself. Excuse yourself out of the conversation, whether it's online, it's in person. You can simply say, oh man, I'm really sorry. I forgot I have somewhere to go. And get out of there. Excuse yourself, because if you can't come up with common ground, it's never going to lead to a non-argument. You're always going to have an argument or a heated debate, and that's not healthy.
How often then do you get the suggestion that, man, Chris, everything that you talk about and everything that you write about in your book, Human Hacking, doesn't it really just come down to being a good person? Like, do you get that?
I do, a lot. I get that all the time.
Why is that not enough?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Ask your question.
I was just going to say, why is that not enough? Like, why isn't just the ethereal idea of being a good person enough?
Because good is subjective. What's good? Right? What's good? There is a tribe, I believe, in Papua New Guinea that believes that you eat your dead relatives. They die and you eat them. And that's the way you honor them. Now, to us as a Western culture, that's repulsive. I can't imagine that. That's disgusting.
Right.
Coming from an Italian American background, when you die, you have a big fanfare. They're laid out. Everyone's got to go look at them. There's lots of food and wine and drink, and stuff like that. Maybe that's offensive to a culture that would handle death very quietly. So my point is that what is good and what is right is subjective to the culture and the person. So it's not enough to say what is good, because what if I was raised by a really horrible set of parents? They were terribly abusive, and my idea of what is good is skewed. And I say to you, Michael, just be good. Well, what's good? Maybe what's good is that you're taught, get what I can. It doesn't matter how it makes you feel. I need to take care of number one. Well, that's not good. So it's not enough to just say be good. It has to be more than that. And being good, or telling people just being a good person, has to have now this context of that means thinking about the other person. That means when I'm in my conversation, that the goal has to be good for you and for me. That means giving you a choice to make a decision, not cornering you into a decision. And when I do those things, now good becomes more clear and good becomes easier to obtain, as opposed to just saying, be good.
When it comes to the work that you do, and you referenced it earlier, breaking into companies on their dime, they're paying you to do this. I'm curious, as I was reading your book, do you ever get behind the security line or get into the office that you're trying to break into and just think, what the heck am I doing here? Like, how is this possible?
Yeah, so a little bit ago, it was last year before COVID, one of my guys and I, we flew to Jamaica to break into 3 banks. And we pull up to the parking lot, and there's the security is these guys on dirt bikes wearing masks with fake painted jaws on them, with sawed-off shotguns on the side of their dirt bike. And I'm like, well, this is not like America. And I had this automatic, we shouldn't be here. We really should not be doing this job. But I'm like, well, we flew here, so we're going to go do it. And, I could tell you more of the story, but we broke in, we got in broad daylight, walked right past security. In now the ATM testing center. There's these giant ATM machines in pieces. And there's a guy in there testing, and he goes, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, we're doing an audit. He's like, oh, okay. And Ryan and I are crawling around inside of these ATMs taking pictures. And I'm thinking to myself, we're going to die here, because someone's going to quickly realize, and there's nowhere to run. This place is surrounded by armed guards, and we're in a locked room with metal doors and bars on the window, crawling around ATMs that we have no business being in. And then we got out of there, and then we went into the call center, and we got a woman to give us her password, and we logged into the whole network, and we're hacking the whole bank. And I'm like, we're going to die. That happened until we exited the bank safely and got back in the van, went back to the office and just cried, that happened 3 times. We're going to die here. I honestly thought that day there was a few times where I was like, what are we doing here?
That particular instance, or maybe another one that you can think of, Chris, do the companies that are paying you to hack into their either physical locations or networks, are they ever incredulous when you actually do it? Like, how in the world did you get past armed guards, through the security, into this locked room? Are they ever just beside themselves?
Yeah. Most of the time we can preempt that in the meetings before we start the work by telling them our success ratios ahead of time. But we had one company that hired for us to break into 7 warehouses. And the previous year, they had hired another company that had about a 35% success ratio. So, we went in, they told us that. So I went into this job thinking, okay, last year, and that company they hired was good. I had respect for them. They were great. I know the guys that were there. I'm like, okay, so, they have good security at this place. And I started off with something very simple, and it was Google Street View. And I just drove in Google Street View around the buildings I was supposed to break into. And as I drove around one of the warehouses, I saw a trash compactor sticking out of the back of one of the buildings. So I zoomed in on it. I took an image of it. I put it in Google reverse image. I got the waste management exact model of that trash compactor. I went to the waste management website. I downloaded all the blueprints for that trash compactor. I made myself an expert on trash compactors overnight. I then had a shirt printed with waste management on a hat, and I grabbed a clipboard. And I went to every one of those facilities and said, hey, you might have a recall on your motor. I need to go check the motor. And the goal was to get in the warehouse and then take pictures of doors that had no cameras at them so we can come back later on at night and break in and steal stuff. And I was 100% successful. And every 7 warehouses. And they got mad. And they said, no, you cheated. And I'm like, I didn't cheat. I have video of it all. I have recordings of all of it. So I send them some of the recordings and they're like, no, this isn't fair. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You hired me for the job. I did it. I didn't know it was going to work so good. I'm happy. You should be happy. Let me help you fix it. And they're like, here's how you're going to fix it. On your 8th one, when you get through, if you get through, we want you to tell the security on your way out that you're a pen tester. And I'm like, that's a horrible idea. You want me to tell armed guard and the warehouse manager that I just broke into their facility and bypassed all their security while I'm standing there? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, if you want the job, you'll do it. I'm like, okay. So I did it, broke in, same thing, story, everything's good. I'm just about to exit the building. And I say, hey, by the way, I just want you to know this is part of an audit. I'm not really with waste management. I'm a pen tester. We just tested your security. And this guy draws his weapon on me. And he's like, get on the ground. And I'm like, I told you this. In my head, I'm like, this is going to happen. So now this guy's calling security and the warehouse manager. We have a letter. We call it the get out of jail free letter. And I give the guy the letter. And the warehouse manager is reading the letter. On the bottom, it has a phone number for my point of contact. And it says, call me if you want to have questions on this guy. So I said, look, at the bottom of that letter is a number for one of your people. If you call that number, he'll explain what I'm doing here. And the guy said, I'm not calling any number on your letter. For all I know, that number rings out to your girlfriend in a van, and she's going to lie to me too. And I'm like, that's actually a really good idea. I said that, and I'm like, Chris, shut up. Like, he's like, I know it's a good idea. That's probably what you're doing. And I'm like, that's not what I'm doing. Just call the number. He's like, I'm not calling a number. So he calls his security guy who knows nothing about the pen test. So now they convinced I'm lying. So they take me and they lock me in a closet. Right. Oh now, gosh. Fortunately, they didn't take any of my stuff off me. So I have lock picks. So I pick my way out of the closet. I get my cell phone back, which was sitting on a table. I call my point of contact and I'm like, get me the heck out of here now. Like, now, get me out, And then they call and they fix it. But the company was dead set that I was cheating. And that's why they made me do that. And it almost cost me getting tased. So, so it happens sometimes, but not as often as, not as often.
Well, thank goodness. I mean, geez. Chris, the vast majority of us, I don't think, are going to be like breaking into to ATM vaults like you did. Or
I hope not.
What is the practical application for what you talk about in the book for the listeners right now who perhaps haven't had a chance to read it? Practically using social engineering, using empathy. You talk about pretexting in the book and building rapport and all these things to guide conversations to ultimately get an outcome that you want. In what situations? Where can we apply this?
So would it help your listeners if I give you an example as a parent?
Fantastic. Yes.
Okay.
Being a dad myself, I'm all ears.
I use, right? Because parents, this is a big deal, right? So how do you use these skills? So I'm going to give you a real life example. My daughter will hate me, but daughter breaks the rules of the house. She does something she's not supposed to do. She joins an online chat group that I strictly forbade her from going on and told her I don't want her on it. Now we find out that she's on this chat. Now, this is the first part of the knowledge in the book that you can use. I have a choice. What pretext do I want to use? Now, pretext doesn't mean making something up. I have 2 choices. I can be angry dad, or I can be inquisitive dad as to why you broke the rules. So what is my desired outcome? So this is how I use all the knowledge in the book. I first decide my desired outcome is to find out if it was purely disobedience, like she just doesn't care about the rules. Was it a mistake? Was it peer pressure? Angry dad's probably not going to do that. So I get rid of that pretext. So my pretext now is inquisitive dad. So I have the next stage of my task. I want to know how to approach her. because rapport is already there somewhat. And I know if I say to her, hey, can you come sit down? I need to talk to you about something. Automatically, she knows she's in trouble, which is going to set the emotional content, not good. So I say, okay, let's wait until we're eating dinner. We're having a great conversation. And then I can say, hey, can I ask you a question about something? Great. So now I have my pretext, which is going to be inquisitive dad. Now, the important part about pretext, you never change it. You don't get to angry dad at some point when she doesn't say an answer you like. You have to keep with your pretext. This is important, right? It's very important in my job. It's very important in this role. And if you need to change pretext, you have to change conversation. And I'll give you an example of that. Okay. So yeah. I start off, we're eating dinner and I say, hey, honey, I got a question. Do you remember I told you I didn't want you to enter this chat room? Now, and I'll tell you why this is so important is what most parents will do at this point is ask a question that gives the child the ability to lie. But why? Why are you going to trap your child? Because now they lie. And then as soon as you say, no, I know you're lying, now they're upset and you've set the wrong emotional content. So don't do it. If you know they're going to lie, then why, right? So you don't do that. So what I say is, you remember that chat room I said I didn't want you to be in? I heard from another parent that you were in there the other night. And I'm just curious, like, what happened? Why would you do that when I strictly asked you not to? Right? So now I'm not telling her that I'm not giving her a chance to lie. I'm not angry. I'm not telling her she's punished. I'm asking, can you explain this to me? Now the look of fear, of course, because she got caught. She's like, well, I didn't mean to. Okay, I get that. Now still not changing pretext, right? I get that. You may not have meant to. I need to understand why, because I thought I was really clear. So maybe you could tell me, was I clear when I said I didn't want you to go into this room? And I listed again. So that way she can't say I wasn't clear. She's like, no, I understood that. And I'm like, okay. So usually you're a really good girl. Like usually you always listen, compliments, right? Validation. So I'm confused at why this one time, why you decided to break the family rules. I mean, do you understand why I don't want you in that chat room? Sometimes there's older boys there and they say things that are really crude. And I've heard that some conversations can get really sexual and you're kind of young. And I just want to protect you from that stuff. And I know I won't be able to always do that. So I'm worried about your safety. So what made you go into that room? And now she's like, well, I was with my friends, so-and-so and so-and-so. And they were telling me that they wanted to meet on a Discord chat. And they invited me into this one. And I just thought I'll be in there for a few minutes. It will be okay. And then it turned into a few hours, and I'm like, okay, so you were peer pressured into this. Yes. I said, okay, well, can you help me then? Because what should I do? Because you disobeyed a rule. And I understand you didn't do it because you're a bad person, but you still disobeyed a rule. So what do you think I should do? Now, generally with a conversation like that, I don't know about your kids, but my kid will say, you should probably take my phone away for a month. You see, honey, that's kind of extreme. I don't know if a month is really a proper punishment for one little disobedience. Maybe we could just say, I'm going to take your phone away 11 at night or 10 at night for the next week. So that way you don't have it late at night, because that's when these temptations often come up. Now, we're able to discipline, get a real answer, never break pretext, and get compliance on what I want without having to be angry dad. And that's how you use these skills in everyday life. And I can give you examples of getting free upgrades, getting a raise, whatever it is. But all of these things, you can use these same exact skill sets. And you just have to but the key to that before I stop, I'm sorry, because I know it's been long-winded,
it's all right,
is planning that out, right? So don't wing it. I plan that out. Like on our book website, I actually have in the resources section a sheet that people can use to plan out their conversations. Now, you shouldn't have that in front of you, but when you have a plan, it's easier to go through it when you're actually having the conversation. Because if you have it planned out, then you'll be stuck in your mind. Okay, don't break pretext. And she could say, I did it because I don't care. I don't. It's a stupid rule. I'm 15. I can handle sexual stuff, and it's like, okay, that's not the answer I want to hear. So, do I break pretext then? Not a good idea. Okay, I get it. Yeah, you can handle that. You're probably more mature than I was when I was 15. But whether you can handle it or not, it's my job to keep you safe. And what if there's a predator on that site? How do I keep you safe from that if I don't know? So how about this? Next time you feel old enough to handle something, why don't you talk to me first and ask, and then we can talk about a better way of going forward as opposed to just sneaking it. See, every time she throws something out, I can turn it around to ask her for assistance and sympathy, which is one of the 10 steps to rapport, and turn that around so I can keep building that pretext and keep building my end goal, which is finding out why and getting compliance.
Why are we then so quick to have the short fuse, to succumb to our emotions in the moment and immediately leap to angry dad? I mean, I'm a father myself, and I've been there plenty of times, more times than I care to admit.
Yeah, me too.
We're what is it about us or that draws us back from succumbing to that emotion?
Yeah, there's a few things. So first is just our nature, our human nature. We've been through it. We've seen the dilemma. We've seen the danger. And whenever you learn or realize something, it seems like, why can't everyone else get it? We all have a little bit of narcissism in us, right? Where it's like, well, of course 2 + 2 is 4. Well, that's not easy when you're 1 year old, right? But when you're 30, 40, whatever, yeah, that's an easy one. So it's easy to be like, none of us would walk up to a 1-year-old and go, of course it's 4, stupid, right? We wouldn't do that. But when it comes to life concepts, we're like, why don't you get this? Why don't you see that I love you? Now think about that statement. If you say to your kid, why don't you see that I'm doing this just to protect you because I love you? How many times did you say I in that sentence? That sentence is all about you. So we're ready to jump to angry dad because it's about our emotions. We're not thinking about our person of interest's emotions, which in this case is our daughter. So that's the first reason. Second reason is we are in and again, I said this before, but we're in a time in human history where we are so used to not only things being delivered instantaneously, like instantaneous gratification for everything, but we're also used to having results instantaneously. And that drives us to being the quickest path to the end as possible. And that is not a great way of approaching conversation unless you don't care about the person, right? If you don't care about your daughter, then yeah, keep going that route because eventually you'll alienate. But you can have really difficult conversation and do it with this way and not return to angry dad. Now, I'm going to caveat that. There may be a time. Let's just say that conversation went where she said, I went in there because I don't care. You're wrong, and I want to be in those chats. And I'm going to chat with 18-year-old boys. I don't care what you say. Now, I need to use angry dad, but not at that moment because that breaks pretext. So what I would say in that moment is I would say, well, honey, that's really disappointing to me. I need to think about this. We're going to talk about this in an hour. Now, in an hour or half an hour, whatever time you set, we finish dinner, we clean up, and then we say, okay, it's time to sit down. Now I want to tell you, I'm really upset. The way you talked to me at the table was disrespectful. Now you're getting grounded. I'm taking your phone away. Right now, angry dad steps in because of the answer. But if we go to angry dad off the bat, think of it, if you ever had an animal that you cornered and you get them in this corner, what do? They stand up on their hind legs, they bare their teeth because they're cornered. Well, in a conversation, if you corner your kids or your boss or your employees or whoever, they're going to reel up and fight back. It's not what we want.
Do some people have a more natural bent towards this, even if they haven't read your book or practiced, planning out their conversations? Do we just have a natural bent towards being able to engineer the world around us?
Yeah, some people have a communication style that is very calm. My brother's like this. My brother's a very calm person. And he is not the most lively, outgoing, but he's just a calm, mellow, always has a nice tone about him, doesn't seem to get angry too often. So for him, it's easier to use what we just said as an example. It's easier for him to do that. Whereas someone like me is, I'm more of the high-strung, go kick a door down, light things on fire and then laugh at it kind of person. So I have to work harder on this. Also, if you're introverted, it's harder to think about using things like pretexting and conversation and elicitation to get a goal. because you're introverted, whereas extroverted people might rely too much on their skill. So there's pros and cons to every type of communicator. It's learning those pros and cons, and that self-awareness helps you to master it regardless of who you are.
The people that practice what you teach and I'll call it the art that you practice yourself, what would you recommend to them to avoid being, or not avoid, but get over feeling fake or feeling nervous, this fear that I'm going to get caught in this situation? Even just walking up to the car rental counter and their goal in mind is to get an upgrade. Like, how can they get over that fear of practicing what you're talking about?
So you don't start off with that, right? I always tell introverts or people who are shy, start off with challenging yourself to have a conversation with a complete stranger. There's your first challenge, just a regular conversation. That's it. When that starts to feel more comfortable, then have what I call a conversation with intent. So now I'm going to have a conversation with a stranger, but I'm going to get their first and last name. Now, when I feel comfortable with that, I'm going to get first, last name, and date of birth. Now, when I get that, I'm going to move up to the rental counter. And when you go to the rental counter to get your first upgrade, make sure that you leave the person with an option. Because where awkwardness comes in is when you built this rapport. So let's say you're at the rental counter. You and I are having great rapport. We're having a good conversation. And then I say, hey, Michael, can you help me out? I really would love an upgrade on this car. Now, you're given one choice. Either I'm going to give in to the guy who just became my best friend in a few seconds, or I'm going to say no to his face. And that choice feels bad. But what if I were to reword that and say, hey, Mike, I probably can't afford it, but can you tell me how much is it to upgrade to the next class or to even first class? Because, I'd love to have, I've never even ridden something like that. Like, what would it be like? Now you have a choice. You can give me a price, you can give me a discount, you can give it for free, or you can say it's not possible. And by giving you that choice, I allow you to express the level of relationship that we've built back to me. And that's really validating for you. So I've rewarded you with validation. I've allowed your brain to produce dopamine. And I've given you a choice that doesn't make you feel bad if you have to reject me. Now, the important part as the asker is that if you don't give me what I want, don't break pretext. So if you say to me, I can't help you today, Chris, there's just no way for me to do an upgrade. I don't go, I knew you were going to be a selfish jerk. Don't do that, right? Just be like, thanks for trying, Michael. That's cool you tried, but maybe next time. And you leave it at that. And then next time you're at that counter and that guy sees you, he's going to remember that great interaction and you'll have a better chance the next time.
Do you have stories of the students you've taught where they've been able to use these techniques into something crazy? I'll use the term crazy. I don't know. You tell me. I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about.
I taught this class that I was teaching in Vegas at Caesar's Palace in a big security convention. And one of my students went out after we discussed nonverbals, and he said, I need to try this at the poker table. And he won $1,500 that night. And he came back and he's like, I can see everyone's faces. I knew when they were going to fold or not. I knew when they were lying. And I'm like, that wasn't the intent, man. That wasn't the intent. But I'm like, as long as you didn't steal it. He's like, no, I just knew when to throw in. I knew when to up. I knew when to call. He's like, this was amazing. And he has emailed me a few times with this has made me more money than I paid for that class. And I'm like, great. I've had that. I had a guy who came to the class and he told me later on his marriage was on the verge of breakup. They were getting divorced. And he took all the skills from the class, went home and fixed his marriage. I've had some crazy stories and stuff like that. People went and fixed life problems because of the skills. In addition to getting upgrades to flights, upgrades on cars, raises on job. I just had a guy email me the other day who took my class and took the cert, and he just got a $10,000 raise and got given the job of his dreams at his company by using the skills. And the thing is, he's worth it, and he has the skills, so he didn't lie, but he has what he wants out of life now because of this. So yeah, there's some great stories that come into me from all these things.
Do you have advice for how we get out of having this right in front of because so much of this is being aware of what's going on around you, right?
Yeah.
And we don't all have the time to, like you did, research the building that we want to get into and assume this persona. Do you have advice for how I got to imagine it's going to be an active thing for at least a while, right? Like it's an active attempt to be more focused. Do you have advice on that?
And not only is it an active attempt at observational skills, right? So I'll give you a practice I used to do because my memory was horrible with that stuff, is I would go into a coffee shop and before I entered, I'd say, I'm going to remember the color of the shirt of the first Asian person I see, right? And that would be just a challenge for me. So I walk in and I scan the room and I see, okay, white shirt, great. Now next time I would say, I'm going to remember the color of the shirt of the first white female and the first black male. And then I walk in there and I would just play these games to where I got to the point where I'm going to walk in and without stopping, I'm going to see if I can count how many cameras I notice on my way to the counter. You know, how many cameras in the ceiling. And then I would come up with a number and then I would slowly turn and see if I was right or wrong. And I would play these games with myself to get my observational skills up to par. But that also takes one other thing, which is you have to be willing to take your phone and put it away. You have to. You know, it's an interesting thing. It's totally off base, not involving this, but I went to a Florence and the Machine concert with my daughter and my wife and my son pre-COVID. And everyone, including us, all have their phones out recording her. And at one song, she says, I need everyone to put your phones away. She goes, can you please just for a minute, put your phones away? She goes, I'm not even in your hand. Can you put them in your pocket, your purse, just put them away? And she waited until everyone in the audience had their phones away. And then she's like, can you just look at the person next to you, give them a hug and sing this song with me? And I get goosebumps telling this story. Mm-hmm. It was an unbelievably uplifting experience to be in a concert with thousands of people and be forced to put away the very thing that everyone's attached to and connect with another human that you have no clue who they are. And if you force yourself to do that, doesn't mean you go around giving people hugs. That can be creepy. But force yourself to put your phone down and non-verbally interact with people. Don't hide behind this. You'll be amazed at the things that you can observe, learn, and see about other people. But it all comes back to one thing with your question, which is self-awareness. No one can do this for you. A book can't do this. I can't do this. You have to be willing to say, I'm going to commit to this. Now, it doesn't mean I never have my phone out. It just means that I take times when I'm out to tell myself that I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do this for the next hour. In this building, I'm going to do this. And I do that not just when I'm breaking in places, but I do this when I'm just everyday life.
Chris, what's something that you've learned new recently?
Ooh, that's a great question. Okay. What did I learn new recently? Okay. So I learned this from a guy named Mark Bowden, who is a master at nonverbals. He's researched nonverbals for decades. He's one of the world's leaders in it. And he talked about, because I'm big into facial expressions and understanding the limbic system and micro expressions and things like that. So he talks about what happens when we meet someone for the first time. So we meet someone for the first time and our brain makes a judgment. Our limbic system makes a judgment. And it says, I like you. Now, it could be for multiple reasons. And none of this has to do with sex, right? So when I say these things, it's not sexual.
Sure.
It's, you're an attractive guy. That means I can trust you, right? So my brain says this. Now, this is the part that I learned. Your prefrontal cortex now only looks for proof that you're right. That's it. It only looks for proof that you're right. So if I say, Michael's a trusting guy, I can trust him, he's a nice guy, it doesn't look for evidence that I'm wrong. It only looks for evidence that I'm right. And this is the science behind biases. Because if I looked at you and I said, I don't like guys with no hair, I don't trust them, then my my brain would go, yeah, you see the way he just shifted? That's a shifty guy.
Yep.
See that lip lick? I knew he was uncomfortable with me. It's all because of no. Yeah. And we do that, right? Our brain does that. And we start to have biases. I may never say that out loud, but I start to repeat this in my brain. And we start to have all of these functions that now prove my point. And I never look for anything outside of my bubble. And I learned that recently, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And the change is to try your hardest that if you make a judgment on someone up front, is to force yourself to leave an open mind to a new judgment. So just because I look at someone and say, hey, you look trusting, or you don't, well, I'll use the other opposite. I don't like you at all. I need to leave my brain open to why is that the case? Why don't I like you? And it can't just be about physical looks. I need to leave that open. Like, hey, this person said some really nice things. I'm going to now change my judgment. That's hard to do, and it takes a lot of practice. But by God, you master that, man, you could be a powerhouse.
There's just so many implications in that, right? I mean, you think of just the bias that we have with somebody who we don't even see face to face, as you were talking about earlier. Just the words that come off of somebody, and I know you were talking about picking up on facial cues and things like that, but what is I can't think of the word that I'm thinking of right now, but the ramifications, that's the word. What's the ramifications of something like that if we're not aware of those judgments that we make?
Yeah. So, okay, let's think about that. And actually, I need to correct something. I think I said when I was telling you prefrontal cortex, it's a neocortex.
Okay.
I just want to repeat. So I'm going to tie this into your question. So imagine this. I make a judgment on someone because of their gender, their skin color, their culture, their race. And that judgment comes in my brainstem, right? Like I said, that limbic system. Now my neocortex is only looking for proof that my judgment is right. What are the implications of that? Is I can now pass that same fear or disgust or hate or contempt on to the next generation, my children. Right now, because what happens? Our children only learn from us. I'll give you a great example of this to really answer your question. When my daughter was little, when she was a baby, I said, I don't want her to be the typical, and I'm using air quotes for people who can't see, girl that everyone says, oh, they're afraid of bugs. So I went to Toys R Us, RIP, sorry, it's not around anymore. But I went to Toys R Us and I bought a giant bucket of fake bugs, plastic roaches and spiders and snakes and ants. And I let them be her toys when she was an infant. To this day, she is not afraid of insects. She wants a snake as a pet. She lets giant ants crawl all over her. She will hold a praying mantis. Most of her girlfriends will scream at the things that she does. What happened? Well, my wife is deathly afraid of spiders. But by teaching my daughter that these things are okay, she does not have that script running in her brain. Now, take that out of insects to people. If I don't like a certain type of person, and I'm going to pass that on to my children, and my children are going to pass it on to their children and their children. This is how we have generations of people who don't understand different people. Now, you can break the script, right? So I came from an Italian-American family raised in New York. Man, they hate the Irish, Well, it's okay. Let's not proliferate that. Let us not have that as a thing I'm going to pass on to my children. And I can do that by breaking that script and saying, you know what, brainstem, I'm not allowing you to make that judgment. You know what, neocortex, I'm not looking for proof. I'm going to stop you right here, and I'm going to look for new proof. I'm going to look for proof of why Irish people rock, because they make great beer and good stew. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to start telling myself things that I like, and that's going to change that script, and it will change it for my children and their children and the next generation. That's
a heavy uplift, right? That's a heavy uplift to break that.
It is.
Jeez.
What I tell people is don't look to change the world, right? Because changing the world is a great platitude and it sounds like nice on paper, but it's not reasonable for me to wake up in the morning and think I'm going to change the world. Let me change my family, and let my family change my little corner of my community. And if that little corner of my community can change the bigger corner of the community, and we can do all of that, all of us did that, now we have a change. but that's not something that I think I'm going to do. I'm not that important in the world. So I just need to take these skills and focus on how do I make my company friendly for every culture, race, gender? How do I make my family friendly for every race, culture, gender? How do I do those things here in my small area that I can control, and then let that grow outside of all of that?
Beautifully said, Chris. Last question for you. What's a question that you wish you were asked more?
Ooh, wow. You have some great questions, Michael. Dang. What's a question I wish I was asked more? Ooh. You know what? I have to think about that just for a second. That is a really, really good one. You asked so many good ones that I'm not even sure if I can. Hang on. I'm going to come up with one, though. I feel like this is generic, so I'm sorry for this, but maybe while I'm chatting, I'll come up with a better one. But a question that I get asked once in a while that I wish we always discussed more were people oftentimes think that if you learn these skills, that you're going to become a bad person. Like you're not going to be able to shut them off. You're going to become a manipulator. You're going to become someone who scams other people or social engineers other people for negative reasons. You're going to pick up girls for one purpose. You know, that's what people think. And sometimes I don't get asked that question. I get accused of that. Aren't you just teaching people to be malicious? So I guess if I had to get asked that question, that would be it. How can you, or why are these skills so useful, and how can you stop yourself from becoming a bad person when you know them?
I'll ask the question then. What can we do to make sure we guard ourselves against using these under false pretenses for wrongdoing? I mean, I know in the front of your book, you make your readers sign a contract, right, to do good with the information.
Yeah.
What can we do, Chris?
Well, thanks for asking the question I gave you. That's good because that's one I don't get asked often. People can go out and buy an awesome kitchen knife, chef knife. And I know the manufacturer hopes that you would go home and cook an amazing meal with it, and that would be awesome. But someone can also commit a murder with it. Now, I guarantee you that the manufacturer does not want that to happen, but people can do that. So I think it's up to the user to have self-awareness, right? That I may get really angry one day at my family, but that should never lead me to grabbing that kitchen knife and doing something horrific with it. So that means I need to have a moral compass before I get the skill. Right? There's too many movies out there of comic book heroes who get a superpower and then use it for bad because that was what was in their heart before they got the superpower. And I'll be honest, this is a superpower. When I can look across the room and see a facial expression and tell you what emotion you're feeling, or I can profile what kind of communication you like right off the bat, or I can tell you how I can get you to give me a password or a social security number or something like that. It's a superpower. And it is, and it feels like that. And it's important to not let that go to your head, create a heavy ego of arrogance to where you feel like I can do these things and I'm going to do these things and it doesn't matter because I need to get it for me. That moral compass will keep you on the straight and narrow, and it will keep you from using these skills in a negative way.
I'm not a superhero fan, but I do know that it was Uncle Ben, right? Peter Parker's uncle, who said, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
Chris,
well, you may be the only one who's not a superhero fan. Like, you may be a unique human in this country.
Maybe so. I like to think so. Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and walking through these and answering all my questions, sir. It has been fantastic. I enjoyed the book. I will be sure to link it in the show notes, as well as to your website. I thank you, sir. This is great stuff.
Thank you so much. This was great. You are really an awesome interviewer, so thank you for that.
I appreciate that more than words. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what about you? Have you ever thought of empathy as a value-neutral thing? That how you use empathy, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, quote unquote, can actually be value neutral. And your mindset and your intentions make it either a positive thing or a negative thing. It's an incredibly fascinating thing to think about because I think we always think of empathy as this really good thing. It's how you use it that ultimately decides if it is good or bad. Many thanks to Chris for sharing his time on the show today and his experiences. The stories were incredible, were they not? Please do me and Chris a huge favor. Share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to today's conversation. Share this episode with your network, post it on social media, tag me, I'm at The Follow-Up Question, and help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Chris that I have on each and every week, please be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me. It's michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can just simply go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.